It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 3, printed in Part B of House Report 118-656. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 3, printed in Part B of House Report Number 118-656, offered by Mr. Massey of Kentucky.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1430, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of my amendment, which simply recognizes that the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Our Constitution establishes a very clear framework for making treaties by the executive and with the advice and consent of the Senate. But our Constitution also establishes a clear framework for making laws that affect our domestic affairs. If any provisions of a treaty are to have legal bearing on United States citizens, those provisions must pass both the United States House of Representatives and the Senate and be presented to the President, as all federal laws must. Treaties don't override our constitutional process for making law. Presidents can't make U.S. law by agreeing to new terms in an international treaty. Every law that American citizens live under must pass the House and the Senate. My colleagues have eloquently made the point that a president can't enter into a treaty without advice and consent of the Senate, and in doing so, they are standing up for the sovereignty of American citizens. But they are requiring the Senate to be that portion of the legislative branch that decides what laws will bear on citizens, depending on what the treaty is. My amendment here is very simple. It says that if a treaty has a law in it that has the bearing on United States citizens, on our domestic activities, then it has to follow the lawmaking process of the Constitution. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserved. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
You know, the bulk of my speech in support of my amendment actually doesn't come from me. It's going to come from Alexander Hamilton, who described in Federalist 75 the treaty-making powers of the executive. He states, its objects are contracts with foreign nations, which have the force of law, but derive it from the obligations of good faith. And this is the most important part. They are not rules prescribed by the sovereign to the subject, but agreements between sovereign and sovereign. The power in question seems therefore to form a distinct department and to belong properly neither to the legislative nor the executive. The qualities elsewhere detailed as indispensable in the management of foreign negotiations point out the executive as the most fit agent in those transactions, while the vast importance of the trust and the operation of treaties as laws plead strongly for the participation of the whole or a portion of the legislative body in the office of making them. So what's he saying here? He's saying you can't make laws, domestic laws, using a treaty. Treaties can't bind the United States to declare war. Treaties can't raise taxes. Treaties can't create new laws for us. And the United States should not take part in international institutions that erode our sovereignty. Congress should not legitimize blatantly unconstitutional notions that agreements that come out of these institutions supersede the Constitution of the United States. So let me just close by saying this. Do we believe that the Senate itself and the President, without consulting the House, could implement a vaccine mandate by merely calling it a treaty and finding another sovereign party to enter into with? I do not. Do we believe that they could implement or impose social distancing on U.S. citizens by calling it a treaty and finding another sovereign to enter into an agreement with? I do not. They have to come to the House. Let's take the example of gun control. Do we think they could impose gun control on U.S. citizens in a treaty? By the way, this is not a hypothetical. In a treaty with the United Nations and some other sovereign countries, merely with the advice and consent of the Senate. That would take 2/3 or 67 votes in the Senate, but it would completely leave out the House of Representatives. No, they cannot do that. That is outside of our Constitution. We are guaranteed a Republican form of government with a legislature that makes the laws that bear on citizens. So I'll close with this most important part of my amendment. which says, if any provisions of a treaty are to have legal bearing on United States citizens, those provisions must pass both the House of Representatives and the Senate and be presented to the President, as all federal laws must. So I urge adoption of my amendment, and I support the underlying bill as well, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Kentucky. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.